What if pain isn't the problem, but actually the pathway back to you? You're listening to The Leadership Wound, From Pain to Permission. I'm Amanda Rohr, your host and founder of Authentically You, coaching for embodied spiritual living and leading. This is where we get honest about the real cost of leadership, the burnout, the pretending, the rejection, and the return to your authentic self. Because this isn't about performance, it's about permission. Welcome to the leader you've always been. And here's the main thing I want you to hold on to as we go throughout this conversation. Renewal isn't optional. It's essential. And if you're already feeling it, you're past due for it. Welcome back. I'm Amanda Rohr, your host for today's conversation and founder of Authentically You, coaching for embodied spiritual living and leading. In today's conversation, we're going to be talking about renewal, the antidote to exhaustion. Have you ever met a leader who wears exhaustion like a badge of honor? You know the type. The one who rattles off how many meetings they've had, how many emails they've answered, how many hours they've worked this week, as if their busyness is something to be proud of. It's almost become the default script of leadership. The longer the hours, the heavier the load, the more respected you must be. But here's the problem. Exhaustion isn't proof of leadership. It's evidence that something's out of alignment. That's why today I want to talk about renewal. Renewal is not a fad. It's not indulgence, and it's not optional. It's essential in every arena of leadership. Because if you're already feeling the exhaustion, the irritability, the lack of presence, and being in the moment with friends or family or coworkers, you're already past due for renewal. Let's get clear. When I say exhaustion, I don't mean being tired after a long day. I'm talking about the kind of weariness that seeps into every corner of our lives. At work, exhaustion looks like sitting in a meeting but realizing you can't remember half of what's been said already. Staring at a task list, not knowing where to start because it all feels overwhelming to you. Or snapping at a colleague or avoiding feedback because you don't have the emotional bandwidth at the moment. At home, exhaustion looks like walking through the door and immediately reaching for your phone or laptop because you can't shut off your brain. Or hearing your kids or spouse share something important, but realizing your mind is still at work and not present with them. Maybe for you, it looks like losing patience over the small things, like something spilled or someone misplaced something because you're already stretched too thin. Or maybe it's lying in bed exhausted but unable to fall asleep because your mind won't stop racing. That's what exhaustion looks like. And most of us don't even notice it until someone else points it out to us. Usually it's a spouse, a child, or a close friend that says, "You're not yourself lately," or "Are you listening to me? I'm right here with you, but I feel like you're not responding." And here's the main thing I want you to hold on to as we go throughout this conversation. Renewal isn't optional. It's essential. And if you're already feeling it, you're past due for it. For over a year now, a friend and I have been practicing intentional retreat days. We aim for 4 times a year or once a quarter. It's not glamorous, but it does take scheduling. We usually just try to find a quiet place to carve out a day. Sometimes it means rearranging family or work responsibilities, but it's been transformational for both of us. Those retreat days don't just give us rest, They reset us. They allow me personally to step away from the noise, the demands, the constant pull of other people's needs, wants, or desires, and actually focus back on listening to myself again, listening to the voice of God within me, so I can remember what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I can tell you this, it doesn't happen unless we schedule it. Renewal will not show up on its own. The habit of renewal is what creates the space for leadership to become sustainable again. So let's define this word renewal. Renewal is not simply taking a nap, scrolling on your phone, or collapsing at the end of the day. Those things might give temporary relief, but they don't restore your soul. Renewal is like a rhythm. It's about creating intentional patterns that restore your body, your mind, and your spirit. It's about Sabbath, a day set apart, stopping long enough to remember you are more than what you produce. It's about embodied practices, like walking in nature, deep breathing, prayer, silence, journaling. It's about stepping back so you can return with clarity, energy, and most importantly, perspective. And here's the tension. It's normal to resist renewal. We're human. The more we neglect it, the more we convince ourselves that we don't need it until we're too far gone. Think about your phone battery. At 50%, you don't think much about it. At 20%, you start to feel the anxiety. Will I have enough power to get me home? Especially if you're using GPS. But if you ignore it completely and let the phone die, it doesn't pop back up instantly. It takes longer actually to recharge if it's dead. That's how renewal works. The longer you push through without it, the deeper the depletion, and the harder and longer it takes to come back. This is why renewal on a consistent basis is so important, because exhaustion doesn't just impact you. It impacts everyone around you. Your family feels it, your coworkers feel it, your community feels it. The people closest to you notice when you're drained, distracted, or short-tempered, and they usually notice it before you do. Renewal isn't indulgence. It's leadership responsibility. Science even confirms it. Chronic stress doesn't just make you tired. It actually rewires your brain. It clouds decision-making. It lowers your capacity and memory. It shrinks your ability to regulate emotions. When you neglect renewal, you're not just pushing through it, you're actually leading on empty. And spiritually, renewal is backed into God's grand design. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's not an afterthought, that's the survival plan. So how do we actually practice renewal? Well, there's 3 different ways I want to talk about today. The first one is micro renewal. 10-minute pauses throughout your day, just stepping away, taking a breath, breathing, stretching, or walking outside are examples of a micro renewal throughout your day. And then we have macro renewal, weekly rhythms of rest. Some call them a Sabbath, some call them a digital detox, or you can find other practices that refill you creatively and spiritually. But the most important thing is to find the time to do it throughout your week. And lastly, if you're able, try a retreat renewal, setting aside days quarterly where the whole purpose is to slow down, reflect, and reset. And here's the catch. You have to schedule all of them. If it's not on your calendar, it will not happen. The tyranny of the urgent will always overtake your renewal. We would never expect our car to run without fuel. We would never drain our phones to zero and still expect it to perform instantly when plugged back in. But that's exactly what many of us do with our leadership when we ignore renewal. The habit of renewal is what keeps leadership from collapsing under its own weight. So I just want to circle back to that main point I said before. Renewal isn't optional. It's essential. And if you're already feeling it, you're past due for it. So let me ask you a question. What would change if you stopped wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor and embraced renewal as part of your leadership? If you could envision a day, a week, a quarter where you took intentional steps about renewal, what would they look like? What would it feel like? And most importantly, after you practiced renewal, what would be the outcomes of that? So let me ask you this. What would change if you stopped wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor and embraced renewal as part of your own leadership? Carve out some time this week to ask yourself that question and imagine a version of yourself that isn't exhausted, but actually feels alive, feels authentic. Because when we take time to quiet our souls, we're given a precious gift, the gift of perspective. Renewal has a wonderful way of giving us a gift of perspective, putting things in a new light. But you don't have to wait for someday to begin. You don't have to carry this hidden cost of leadership one more week on your own. So let me ask you, what would change if you stopped wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor and embraced renewal as part of your everyday leadership, as part of your weekly leadership, as part of your quarterly leadership? What would your team notice if you showed up rested and present? What would your family experience if you brought peace home instead of depletion? What would you feel like if you led from overflow instead of running on empty? I believe it could change everything. And the reason I believe this is because the rhythms of renewal changed everything for me. And here's the good news. You don't have to wait for someday to begin. Renewal isn't just an idea, it's a practice. It's available to all of us. It starts with one choice, one rhythm, one intentional step. This is the work I do every day with leaders, helping them step out of exhaustion and into rhythms that restore freedom and joy. And I do this primarily by helping them to authentically live and lead in their everyday lives. If you've been wearing your exhaustion as a badge of leadership or know someone who is, I encourage you to book a free 30-minute call at my website, authenticleadershipcollective.com. There we can start a conversation so you can begin to experience renewal in your own life and leadership today. If you check out my website, you can also find free resources like a morning meditation, a simple practice to center your day in God's presence. I also have a free guide called 10 Traps That Keep Leaders Stuck and How to Break Free. Because exhaustion isn't leadership, renewal is. Until next time, lead like you.